Ladies and gentlemen, today we confront one of the most insidious forces that has plagued societies, crippled economies, and shattered dreams: corruption. Corruption isn't just about financial misdeeds, it's a betrayal of trust, a perversion of power, and a parasite that feeds on the well-being of a nation. To understand corruption, we must look at its roots, its consequences, and most importantly, what we can do to eradicate corruption. At its core is a profound betrayal of public trust. It is not simply a legal violation or a financial crime, it is a breakdown of the fundamental relationship between those who serve and those who are served. Trust is the foundation upon which societies, governments, and institutions are built, and corruption erodes that foundation, creating cracks that run deep into the lives of ordinary citizens. When corruption takes hold, it compromises the integrity of institutions and damages the social contract that binds communities together. It becomes a theft of faith, of resources, and of opportunities that are meant to uplift, rather than oppress, those who are governed. The relationship between citizens and public officials is rooted in mutual understanding. Citizens grant leaders the authority to manage resources, make decisions, and protect the common good, and in return, they expect that those leaders will act with integrity, honesty, and accountability. Corruption shatters this expectation. When an official embezzles funds, takes bribes, or manipulates policies for personal gain, it is not merely a breach of ethics, it is a violation of the trust placed in them by those they are supposed to serve. It signifies that the leader values personal gain over public welfare, which breeds cynicism and resentment among the population. This betrayal transforms hope into disillusionment, as citizens come to see their leaders not as champions of their welfare, but as adversaries with interests misaligned with the public good. The impact of corruption goes beyond immediate financial losses, it extends to every aspect of society. For instance, in education, corruption might manifest in the misallocation of funds, leaving schools with inadequate resources, untrained teachers, and unsafe facilities. Students, who deserve an environment conducive to learning and growth, are left without the tools they need to succeed. This perpetuates a cycle of poverty and limits opportunities for future generations. In healthcare, corruption might mean that funds intended for hospitals and medical supplies are siphoned off, leading to shortages in essential medicines, poorly equipped hospitals, and overworked, underpaid healthcare staff. When people cannot access the care they need, not because of natural limitations, but because of corruption, it causes unnecessary suffering and, in many cases, loss of life. These are human costs that cannot be measured solely in financial terms, but have profound implications for society as a whole. Moreover, corruption deepens social inequality. It is often the poor and marginalized who bear the brunt of corrupt practices, as they are already disadvantaged and lack the means to navigate or circumvent a corrupt system. When public services that are meant to be accessible to all require bribes or personal connections, those who can afford to pay or have influential contacts benefit, while the rest are left to struggle. The wealthy or well-connected can bypass the rules, while ordinary citizens are left to endure the limitations imposed by a corrupt system. This unfairness fosters a sense of alienation and bitterness among those left out, creating societal divisions that undermine unity and cooperation. Over time, such divisions solidify into a rigid class structure where upward mobility becomes nearly impossible, as those in power use their positions not to improve society but to preserve their privilege. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to restore. When citizens lose faith in their leaders and institutions, they become less likely to participate in civic life. They may avoid voting, shun public meetings, or ignore calls to participate in community initiatives, believing that these efforts will make no difference. This apathy is corrosive. It allows corruption to flourish unchecked, as there is no public outcry or demand for accountability. Corruption thus becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, where the lack of trust leads to disengagement, which in turn allows corrupt officials to act with impunity. The social contract, which relies on active participation and mutual respect, disintegrates, leaving a void where community, cooperation, and shared goals once existed. In addition to fostering disengagement, corruption has a detrimental effect on the economy. When public funds are embezzled, misused, or otherwise diverted from their intended purpose, there is less money available for infrastructure, social programs, and other public goods. Roads remain unpaved, bridges go unrepaired, and development projects stagnate. This lack of investment stifles economic growth, as businesses are reluctant to operate in environments where bribery is a prerequisite for contracts or permits. Foreign investors also tend to avoid corrupt markets, wary of the unpredictability and extra costs that corruption introduces. Consequently, corruption not only drains existing resources, but also prevents the inflow of new ones, hampering economic progress and limiting job opportunities for citizens. Corruption also distorts the political landscape. When leaders use public office to enrich themselves, they are likely to take measures to preserve their positions, often at the expense of democratic principles. Corrupt leaders may manipulate elections, suppress dissent, and restrict media freedom to maintain control, creating an environment where opposing viewpoints are silenced and public scrutiny is minimized. This erosion of democratic values limits citizens' ability to hold their leaders accountable, allowing corruption to become deeply embedded in the political system. In extreme cases, corruption can lead to authoritarianism, as leaders prioritize maintaining power over upholding democratic norms and protecting individual freedoms. The betrayal of public trust then transforms into an outright denial of the people's rights, with those in power treating governance as a personal entitlement rather than a public duty. The ripple effects of corruption extend internationally as well. When one nation is plagued by corruption, it affects its relations with other countries, limiting opportunities for collaboration and mutual benefit. Corruption fosters instability, which can lead to internal conflicts, displaced populations, and even regional crises. Neighboring countries and international organizations may hesitate to engage with or support a corrupt state, reducing its access to foreign aid, investment, and development assistance. In a globalized world, corruption is not confined to borders. Its impact spreads, affecting economies, security, and international relations. Thus, the betrayal of public trust within a nation has far-reaching consequences that compromise stability and prosperity worldwide. However, corruption is not an unstoppable force. It can be challenged and eventually eradicated. This process begins with an active, informed citizenry that demands transparency, accountability, and integrity from its leaders. Legal reforms, independent watchdogs, and an unbiased judicial system are essential tools in the fight against corruption, as they provide mechanisms through which corrupt practices can be exposed and punished. Civil society organizations play a critical role as well, raising awareness, educating citizens about their rights, and mobilizing public opinion. By creating a culture that condemns corruption and values honesty, we can begin to repair the damage and restore trust in public institutions. Ultimately, fighting corruption requires courage and commitment from all levels of society. Each act of integrity, each stand against wrongdoing, each demand for accountability contributes to a collective effort that reaffirms the values upon which society rests. It is a slow, challenging process, but one that is necessary for the health and stability of any nation. Corruption may be a betrayal of public trust, but the response to it, the fight for transparency, fairness, and justice, can restore that trust and ensure a brighter, more equitable future for all. Corruption is often financial, but it isn't always solely about money. When we hear the term corruption, we often think of bribes, embezzlement, and financial kickbacks, forms of misconduct that undeniably involve the illicit flow of money. However, corruption can extend beyond monetary transactions to include abuses of power, favoritism, manipulation, and the distortion of systems meant to serve the public good. Such forms of corruption are equally harmful, if not more so, as they undermine the very principles of fairness, justice, and equality that societies depend on. Non-financial corruption often involves a misuse of influence, where decisions are made based on personal connections or favors rather than merit or legality. For example, nepotism is a common manifestation, where officials appoint family members or friends to positions of power, regardless of their qualifications. This practice, though it may not directly involve money changing hands, still deprives more qualified individuals of opportunities and can weaken the effectiveness of an organization. When key roles in government, corporations, or public institutions are filled by unqualified people chosen for personal reasons rather than their skills, the performance and credibility of these organizations suffer. Public confidence erodes as people see positions of authority filled by those with connections rather than competence. This, in turn, can lead to inefficiencies, mismanagement, and a further decline in public trust. Another example of non-financial corruption is favoritism, where certain individuals or groups receive preferential treatment due to their relationship with someone in power. This can be seen in cases where contracts, licenses, or other privileges are awarded based on personal connections rather than through a fair and competitive process. In this scenario, businesses or individuals who may be more deserving or capable are overlooked, which limits innovation, discourages competition, and can ultimately harm the economy. When favoritism becomes ingrained in a system, it breeds an environment where those who are left out feel disenfranchised, while those who benefit become accustomed to special treatment, expecting to succeed without putting in the necessary effort. Over time, this creates a toxic culture where merit is devalued and loyalty to influential figures is prized above all else. Political corruption is another form that doesn't always revolve around money but can have widespread consequences. Politicians may manipulate legal systems, censor media, or restrict opposition to maintain power, all of which are forms of corruption that undermine democracy and civil rights. By stifling dissent, these leaders create an atmosphere where only their voices and ideas are heard, effectively silencing alternative perspectives and limiting public debate. This consolidation of power can lead to authoritarianism, where the leader's interests are protected at all costs, often to the detriment of the public. In such cases, corruption becomes less about individual gain and more about sustaining a power structure that serves a select few. The manipulation of media, for example, ensures that information is controlled, which misleads citizens and reduces transparency, making it easier for corrupt actions to continue unchecked. Influence peddling is another non-financial form of corruption that involves leveraging one's position to sway decisions in favor of particular parties. High-ranking officials or well-connected individuals may use their influence to secure benefits for others, often in exchange for loyalty or future favors rather than direct monetary payment. This type of corruption is subtle but pervasive, as it allows individuals to achieve goals or acquire assets without fair competition. Influence peddling creates an uneven playing field, where those who lack connections are at a distinct disadvantage, regardless of their qualifications or abilities. The presence of influence peddling can dissuade others from participating in public life or pursuing certain opportunities, as they perceive that success depends not on merit, but on whom one knows. Judicial corruption is another troubling aspect of non-financial corruption. When judges or other members of the legal system allow personal relationships, biases, or external pressures to affect their rulings, justice becomes compromised. Decisions made in a court of law should be impartial, based on evidence and legal principles. Yet when corruption seeps into the judiciary, it turns these spaces into arenas where power and influence hold more weight than fairness. This damages the rule of law, as people begin to see the legal system not as a protector of rights, but as another tool for those in power. When the public loses faith in the judicial system, it weakens the entire foundation of civil society, leading to distrust, fear, and even vigilantism, as individuals may feel compelled to take matters into their own hands. Another form of corruption, moral corruption, affects institutions and individuals alike, often on a less visible but equally destructive level. Moral corruption occurs when ethical principles are disregarded or compromised to achieve a particular outcome. This might include lying to protect oneself or an institution, manipulating statistics, or covering up wrongdoings to avoid scandal. While moral corruption may not always involve financial gain, it nonetheless leads to a deterioration of trust and integrity. In some cases, individuals justify unethical behavior as a means to an end, rationalizing that the outcome will justify the methods. However, this type of corruption erodes the moral fabric of society, making it easier for future transgressions to be accepted or excused. When morality is compromised, even in small ways, it can set a precedent that normalizes corrupt behavior, leading others to follow suit and perpetuate a cycle of dishonesty and betrayal. Educational institutions are also vulnerable to non-financial corruption, particularly in the form of academic fraud, favoritism, and biased admissions processes. When students or faculty engage in unethical practices to gain advantages such as falsifying credentials, plagiarizing work, or bribing officials to secure admissions, they contribute to a system where academic achievements are devalued. The impact of corruption in education extends far beyond individual cases, as it undermines the credibility of academic institutions and devalues legitimate accomplishments. Students who work hard to earn their place may feel demoralized when they see others achieving success through dishonest means. This can lead to a sense of futility, where individuals question the value of integrity and hard work, knowing that shortcuts and connections can provide similar rewards. Over time, this weakens the educational system, creating professionals who may lack the necessary skills or knowledge but still hold influential positions due to corrupt practices. Corruption, whether financial or otherwise, is a pervasive problem that damages societies on multiple levels. Beyond financial schemes, corruption can also manifest as power abuse, favoritism, manipulation, and a lack of accountability. In some instances, corruption's impacts are more harmful than direct financial misconduct, as they can alter the structure of society, reduce equality, and foster long-term systemic problems that affect generations. This underscores the need to address corruption in all its forms and recognize that its influence extends far beyond mere monetary considerations. While financial corruption often gets the most attention, non-financial corruption plays a significant role in creating an unequal and unjust society. When examining the lives and actions of historically corrupt individuals, it becomes evident that corruption, whether for money or power, has far-reaching consequences. Some individuals are widely recognized for the depths of their corruption, often amassing immense personal wealth or power at the expense of their citizens and society. A few prominent examples include Mobutu Sese, the former president of Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, who drained billions from the nation's coffers for personal use, leaving a country mired in poverty and instability. Similarly, Ferdinand Marcos, the former president of the Philippines, used his position to amass extraordinary wealth while impoverishing his nation, a legacy that continues to impact Filipino society. Each of these figures, while unique in their circumstances, demonstrates the broader truth about corruption's insidious nature. Whether through the siphoning of funds, the abuse of political power, or the manipulation of systems, these examples illustrate how corruption, in any form, financial or otherwise, undermines trust, justice, and progress within society. Is a hidden threat, lurking beneath the surface of society, often invisible to the everyday observer, but steadily undermining structures, institutions, and trust. Unlike more visible social problems, corruption operates in secrecy, concealed by complex networks, influence, and manipulation. This hidden nature makes it particularly dangerous, as people may not even realize how deeply it impacts their lives. By the time the effects are visible, the damage has often permeated various levels of governance, economic stability, and social integrity, weakening the very foundations on which a society is built. The secrecy of corruption allows it to grow unchecked, often escaping the notice of those it harms the most. It frequently begins in small, seemingly inconsequential ways, an unreported gift here, a favor there, but over time it escalates. This gradual growth is insidious, as small acts of corruption accumulate into larger, more systematic practices that become normalized within institutions and organizations. Those who engage in corruption learn to conceal their actions, using their positions and influence to avoid detection. They may enlist others in their schemes, creating networks of complicity that protect each member by ensuring that everyone has a stake in keeping the corruption hidden. As a result, corruption becomes self-sustaining. It is covered up, justified, and perpetuated by those who benefit from it, even as it continues to erode public trust. In such an environment, the rule of law becomes selectively applied. Corrupt systems often allow powerful individuals to evade justice, while the less privileged are punished for even minor infractions. Those with connections to political figures, law enforcement, or the judiciary are often able to secure favorable outcomes, while those without power may find themselves subjected to harsh penalties. This creates a legal system that is not just, but arbitrary, where laws are only enforced when it is convenient for the elite. The law thus loses its legitimacy as it becomes associated with inequality, favoritism, and partiality. Corruption also exacerbates social inequality. The resources that should be used to uplift marginalized communities are siphoned off by the corrupt, deepening the divide between the rich and the poor. Public services become inaccessible to those who need them the most, while those with wealth or power can bypass the system entirely. For example, in countries with widespread corruption, individuals may have to pay bribes to access basic health care or to have their children admitted to schools. This creates a system where access to essential services becomes a matter of wealth rather than need, further entrenching social divisions. In such a society, the poor are forced to contend with substandard services, while the rich can afford to live insulated from the consequences of corruption. The impact of corruption on a society is far-reaching, affecting not only the political, economic, and social spheres, but also the cultural fabric of a nation. A society that tolerates corruption begins to internalize a culture of impunity and dishonesty. When corruption becomes normalized, people may view unethical behavior as acceptable or even necessary for survival. This undermines moral and ethical values, leading to a situation where integrity is no longer valued and personal gain takes precedence over the common good. In such a society, individuals may become less willing to cooperate for the benefit of all, as they are conditioned to believe that only those who engage in corrupt practices can succeed. Education, which should be a force for empowerment and social mobility, can also be deeply affected by corruption. In countries where corruption is pervasive, access to education is often determined by wealth and connections. Bribery for admissions, favoritism in grading, and the misallocation of funds meant for educational resources are just a few of the ways corruption can undermine the education system. This results in a generation of young people who are ill-prepared to contribute to society and the economy. As education becomes more of a privilege for the elite, the ability of disadvantaged communities to break the cycle of poverty becomes severely limited. Corruption's impact on health systems can be similarly devastating. In countries where healthcare is corrupt, the quality of medical care can be severely compromised. Funds allocated for medical supplies, infrastructure, and salaries may be embezzled by corrupt officials, leaving hospitals and clinics underfunded and understaffed. Patients may be forced to pay bribes to receive treatment, or worse, be denied care altogether. In such a system, only the wealthy can access adequate health care, while the poor are left to suffer without adequate treatment. The unequal distribution of healthcare resources contributes to the persistence of health disparities, which can have long-term consequences for a country's overall well-being. In addition to these direct impacts, corruption also fosters an environment in which environmental resources are mismanaged and exploited. In countries with weak regulations and rampant corruption, industries can operate with little regard for environmental sustainability. Corrupt officials may allow illegal logging, mining, or pollution in exchange for bribes, leading to the degradation of natural resources and ecosystems. This not only harms the environment, but also jeopardizes the livelihoods of communities that depend on these resources. The exploitation of natural resources for personal gain at the expense of the public good is another example of how corruption creates an unjust system. The long-term consequences of corruption extend beyond individual countries, as the effects of corruption can spill over into the international arena. Countries with high levels of corruption may struggle to attract foreign investment or engage in meaningful international cooperation. Corruption can also hinder international efforts to address global challenges, such as climate change, poverty, and conflict resolution. International organizations, NGOs, and governments may find it difficult to work with corrupt regimes, as they cannot rely on local leaders to uphold agreements or honor commitments. This undermines global efforts to promote peace, security, and sustainable development, further perpetuating injustice on a global scale. Corruption, at its core, is the abuse of power for personal gain. And when it becomes pervasive within a society, it erodes the very foundation of social values that hold communities together. Social values like honesty, integrity, fairness, and respect for others are essential to maintaining harmony, trust, and cooperation within a society. However, corruption distorts these values, creating an environment where ethical behavior is no longer prioritized and moral compromises become normalized. As corruption spreads, it weakens the societal fabric, contributing to a breakdown in social cohesion and a decline in the collective sense of responsibility. It leads to the loss of trust in institutions, individuals, and even social relationships as people begin to view unethical behavior as acceptable, if not necessary, for survival or success. At its most basic level, corruption directly undermines the value of honesty. When individuals see those in positions of power engaging in corrupt practices, whether through bribery, nepotism, or embezzlement, it sends a message that dishonesty is an acceptable means of achieving personal or professional gain. In many cases, corrupt leaders or public officials not only conceal the truth, but actively engage in deception to protect their wealth and position. As this behavior becomes more common, the moral compass of the society starts to shift. People begin to justify their own unethical actions, whether in their personal lives or in business dealings, under the assumption that everyone is doing it or that corruption is simply how the system works. Over time, this erosion of honesty can permeate all levels of society, resulting in widespread dishonesty in both private and public spheres. Furthermore, corruption undermines the value of integrity. Integrity is the adherence to moral and ethical principles, the quality of being honest and having strong moral convictions. In a society where corruption thrives, integrity becomes a rare commodity. Those who refuse to participate in corrupt practices are often marginalized, ridiculed, or even punished. For example, honest individuals in business may struggle to compete against others who engage in bribery and fraudulent schemes to win contracts or secure jobs. Public servants who refuse to accept bribes may find themselves overlooked for promotions or sidelined in favor of others who bend the rules. In this environment, integrity becomes an obstacle to success, leading to a cycle where those with the most integrity are penalized while those willing to compromise their morals are rewarded. This creates an environment where integrity is no longer valued and ethical behavior is seen as a hindrance rather than a virtue. Corruption is a widespread social issue that impacts nations across the globe, affecting everything from governance to the daily lives of citizens. One of the most devastating consequences of corruption is how it exacerbates poverty and inequality. Corruption does not merely contribute to the unjust distribution of wealth, but it actively hinders economic growth, deprives individuals of opportunities, and perpetuates social divisions that keep the most vulnerable in a cycle of poverty. By diverting resources away from essential public services, undermining the functioning of key institutions, and promoting a system of favoritism, corruption creates a landscape where the rich and powerful thrive while the poor are left to suffer. The wealthy and powerful benefit disproportionately from corruption, deepening the divide between the rich and the poor. In corrupt systems, wealth and resources are concentrated in the hands of a few individuals, while the majority of the population struggles to meet their basic needs. Corruption enables the elite to perpetuate their wealth by using political influence, bribery, and nepotism to control key sectors of the economy. For example, wealthy business owners may use their connections to secure lucrative government contracts or favorable regulations that protect their interests, while the poor are left to fend for themselves in a system that offers them no such protections or opportunities. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few perpetuates social and economic inequality as the rich get richer while the poor remain trapped in poverty. Moreover, corruption discourages investment and undermines the confidence of both domestic and international investors. When corruption is widespread, businesses are less likely to invest in a country or region due to the risks associated with bribery, extortion, and a lack of transparency. Investors are reluctant to engage in economies where they must navigate corrupt bureaucracies. and where political connections are more important than business acumen. The lack of foreign and domestic investment leads to stagnation in key industries, reducing the potential for economic growth and job creation. This, in turn, means fewer opportunities for the poor to improve their living conditions and achieve upward mobility. Additionally, corruption perpetuates a system of impunity where the poor and marginalized are more likely to suffer from injustice. In corrupt systems, law enforcement and the judiciary are often compromised, and the powerful can manipulate the legal system to avoid accountability. This creates an environment where the wealthy and influential are able to escape justice, while the poor are more likely to face harsh punishment for minor offenses. For example, in some countries, the rich can use bribes to secure lenient sentences or avoid prosecution altogether, while the poor are often incarcerated for petty crimes or subjected to harsh penalties. This lack of legal fairness further entrenches inequality, as the poor are unable to seek justice or redress for the wrongs they face.